that a student, family, educators, service providers, everyone together looking at these various components that are so critical and some of these differences, and getting to know the individual. I'm talking generally today, but obviously it's very individualized depending on the strengths and needs of the particular student looking at this transition process. But we look at personal freedom. In high school, more than likely the individual is living with their family member, and if they are going to be on campus, living on campus in a dorm, and much more personal freedom in terms of decision making and how they will spend their days. Structure is absolutely something that we find is very critical. In high school, that structure sort of is built in, if you will. You have the classes, you go to a particular location and you have those classes, and there's a schedule that's laid out. The difference with structure as in college is the student determines that structure. And an example of some of the things we've had to deal with is that we have students with ASD, and I'm using these particular examples today. It is not unique to these students per se, but I am wanting to focus, since we are focusing on students with ASD. We had a student who structured their days where they took multiple classes on 2 or 3 days of the week, non-stop throughout the day, 8 to 5, really packed it in, and then saved those other days to study all day from 8 to 5, to study the whole day. Well, we really had to work with the student that, no one really sits down from 8 to 5 nonstop and does that kind of work. And we need to look at how to structure their day. They do work with academic advisors, but academic advisors are really, some will help with structure, but others, it really is a conversation about what classes for their major and that kind of thing. So structure is going to be very important, especially in their free time, not in class. And in college, you are out of class more than you are in class, typically in terms of the typical structure. Classes, again, there could be predictable classes, if you will, size and where you go in high school, but in college, they could be very large lectures. They could be small, intimate classes, but very large lectures of 100 students or so, depending on the size of the college. With teachers or educators, you typically in high school see that teacher every day or almost every day, depending on the schedule that the high school has set up. In college, you have less contact with your instructor, and that can be something that can be very important for students to use office hours. We really work with students a great deal to take advantage of faculty office hours so that they increase their contact with the faculty member to get to know them better. Study time, there's a significant increase in reading and the material. Over a semester or term, a great deal of material is covered. Tests are not sometimes on material that as you go along, there could be midterm or exams only, so that testing or that type of thing can vary greatly from some of the type of testing in high school where you cover maybe a certain section of material and then you're tested on that. Grades can be based on a number of different factors, and that is usually laid out in the syllabus. I have to say that we really work with students to make sure they're very familiar with the syllabus, because that is their guidepost for how the class will be when assignments are due, when testing will happen, what the readings are. And now, because more and more universities and colleges and schools are using technology as a way for communication, a lot of faculty communicate primarily through a platform like Blackboard, where you go to Blackboard to post a question to a faculty member or to definitely get syllabus or see whatever changes there are in the class schedule. We had a young man with ASD who had heard that he needed to check Blackboard in the class, but really wasn't sure what that was until we caught the fact when he told us that, and it was mid-semester and he had never been on Blackboard. So we really emphasize sort of that knowledge. And there can be differences in physical environment where you're moving around the campus a great deal for class to class. Legal protection also changes between high school and college, and along with that, with documentation. Literally could spend an entire presentation on documentation. That's probably one of the biggest changes that families and students encounter in this transition. I will touch on it during this presentation, but would encourage all of you to really make sure you are familiar with the documentation and legal protections that are in differences between high school and college. Advocacy is so important. We are working more and more in middle school and down even in elementary and middle and high school to really work with students on this, on advocacy, because in college, you don't receive services unless you self-identify and seek out those services, which is very different than in high school. So advocacy becomes a very critical component, not only in college, but again, preparing ultimately for employment. So that is a very key factor in terms of preparing for this transition and ultimately once in college. And again, around documentation is receiving those necessary accommodations and what is involved with that, and some of the differences of that between high school and college. So let's look for a moment in sort of the changes in roles and responsibilities. OSD is the Office for Students with Disabilities. Every campus who receives federal funding, and pretty much all campuses have an office. They may call it the Disability Support Services Office or the Office for Students with Disabilities, or it may go by another name that is more generic, Learning Opportunities Center, where they may serve a wide variety of students and not just students with disabilities. But the gold, if you will, color is really the student responsibility. And as you can see, the student really drives the next two columns on this, oops, I'm sorry, I apologize. It really drives this. Again, the student needs to register with this office, meaning they need to self-identify, and that can be at the point of being accepted into college. The sooner an individual notifies the office that they are seeking accommodations when they are attending the college, it's very important. The student needs to provide current documentation, and again, that will vary from college to university setting, and what is considered or determined by the office as what type of documentation they are asking. They need to meet with someone through that office to discuss accommodation needs. They will receive what is called a letter of accommodation, which does not list the student's disability, but lists what accommodations the office is saying, the university office is saying that the student is eligible to receive. But the student must find a time with the faculty member to provide this letter. They do not have to give the letter to the faculty member, but they do need to discuss what the accommodations are. And again, with advocacy, we know that faculty members see a large number of students over the course of their week. So when testing, one of the accommodations could be testing testing at the OSD in a quiet environment. So they would go to the office of the Students with Disabilities office to take their testing. And we've had to work with students that, yes, it's very likely you will have to remind the faculty member that the exam or test midterm needs to be sent to the office in a timely fashion so that you can arrange a time to take the exam. So you can see that the student is very much leading into what happens next. So the office then determines eligibility. I will talk about this in just a few minutes. Under IDEA, it's an entitlement. Students are entitled to services. In post-secondary ed, it becomes an eligibility, and the eligibility is based on how to best serve the student to access all materials and information. So that is a very, very big difference. This office then will authorize the appropriate accommodations. That means that the university, they are representative of the university, and they are saying as that representative that the student is eligible for these particular services that need to happen within the classroom accommodations. And they assist faculty, the office does, with any questions that they may have. They cannot discuss the student, the disability, but they can talk about the accommodations. The student, it is up to the student whether they identify what their disability is, but they do need to talk to the faculty member about what the accommodations are. Faculty members then need to be implementing these particular accommodations. They need to respect student privacy. They are not allowed to say something in class. For example, perhaps a student needs a note taker and it's a voluntary, some schools, some universities do provide note takers in the class. Oftentimes it is another student who volunteers, but it must be done in a way that it does not disclose that this individual has a disability, and that is why they need a note taker. And they can contact that office, the faculty can, for any particular questions that they have. But this is a very, very big shift from high school to post-secondary ed, and many of these same shifts happen in employment under different circumstances, obviously, but again, that whole receiving what accommodations are needed to be able to fully access and be able to perform is very much along the same lines in employment. I wanted to show this particular slide because there are very big differences between the K-12 system, if you will, and college. The expectation at college is, and I think today there is an underlying assumption that when we talk about college, I'm talking about the more traditional process, if you will, that you get in Virginia, an advanced studies diploma or a standard diploma. You apply for college and go through that process. When I was first asked to do this presentation, I asked about this because there are programs and universities and colleges are offering programs. VCU does. We offer ACID in college, which is for students with who receive an applied studies diploma, and it is a non-traditional track, if you will, for college. Probably the most frequent call I get from family members about their son or daughter with ASD in terms of some of the issues that they're facing in college. It it's not about, generally, it is not about the academics. These particular students are able to be very successful in their achievement in academics, but it's all those other independent decisions and living on their own, if they're on campus, social skills, as we know. And I get a number of calls about what would, the typical university or college offer. And we're going to talk a little bit about that through that decision-making process, because colleges and universities 2- and 4-year vary in terms of the level and amount of support, and we'll talk about that. The parent involvement has been something that has been discussed and talked about, and again, we still have this philosophy of home, school, and community as we prepare students. But as you can see, as students move through this process, when in elementary, maybe there's a very thin, as you can see, very thin blue line representing student responsibility. I'd like to say that this is a sort of a representation of sort of a generic or across the board involvement, if you will, but we are working in the field, and I know educators and families and students themselves are working very hard to increase their blue square, if you will, through all these steps. So the self-determination and learning about yourself really being highlighted even more in elementary school. But when you're looking at sort of what's happening in the school, what the needs are, what the supports might be, it really is sort of a parent's school responsibility. Students move to middle school. The blue square gets a little larger, but we're still seeing that representation, strong representation of parent and educator in terms of involvement in sort of the overall school. In high school, the square gets a little bit bigger for students, but we're still seeing a high amount of educator and family. But then you move to college and look at the difference in terms of the student. The student really at that point is in the driver's seat. Now, that's not to say that the parent's responsibility is totally diminished. We're not saying that. I don't want to give that message. But there are changes, as we know, with all young adults. Our relationship with our young adults begin to evolve and change as they grow older. So what we are working on and what we are hoping, again, is especially in those middle and high school years of really expanding that student responsibility, so the jump to college or in that transition is not as great for them in terms of having those skills, knowledge, and preparation. So determining the right match for college. We want to be thinking as we're exploring various options. Again, we're looking at sort of what the career goal may be, what type of degree or certificate would really fulfill the career that the student is seeking. But there are some things that we want to be looking at. We want to be looking at what we call campus climate, and of course we are more and more now in the virtual world. So going and doing on-campus visitations, even during the best of times, if you will, sometimes is difficult. So a lot of universities and colleges offer virtual tours. But you really do want to get an idea sort of what that atmosphere is and the acceptance across the board in terms of differences in learning styles. At VCU, our strategic plan talks very clearly and strongly about diversity, about students across various groups and how diversity builds on what we are about. And can give a sense if that is something that you see and you get a sense of what maybe the priorities are of the campus. So getting sort of that general idea about the campus climate, size, the size of the campus, whether you go to a small university college, or whether you start at a 2-year, or whether it's a large 4-year, those are really important to determine in terms of how well an individual with ASD would be within that environment. We look at program philosophy. Again, does the college offer specialized programs, or is it support offered in the college's overall program? And I want to talk just a minute about this. If a college offers and is advertising, and you see, or through your exploration, that they offer programs specifically for students with autism, it's important to look at whether it is sort of an all-inclusive. They go into the regular classes and are on the campus, but are they, what level of support are they receiving? What are those supports? When we're talking about accommodations through the Disability Support Service Office, if the university says these are the accommodations that can be provided to a student, there is not a cost associated with that. But what you need to be looking at is if it is a specialized program where they talk about specialized supports and services, typically there are costs to that above and beyond the tuition and other costs of the college. So you need to be aware of what program costs would look like. Academic adjustments, this would be what types of services are within the academic realm. Sometimes it is the number of students that, or the number of, when students are looking at perhaps substituting a course or for a requirement, or those type of adjustments, you really need to be looking at what the school says about those types of academic adjustments. Also, course load. I can't emphasize enough, one service that a student would receive through the Disability Support Services Office is priority registration. You need to find out if students do get priority registration. That enables students with disabilities to register early on for classes, helping them to better build what their schedule is and have access before the general population, if you will. There are other groups that get priority registration, but it's really, really critical to have that kind of offer. And then looking at what's the typical time frame for students, including students with disabilities, to complete their degree and graduate. Again, are there specific supports designed for students with autism? And what supports are available to students on a campus? For instance, counseling services, career services, writing labs. You know, universities and colleges are very much concerned and want to make sure that students do persist in college and are do persist in that they do stay in college and graduate. There are a lot of first-year college student programs on campus that allow students to meet in smaller groups and adjust to campus life. A number of colleges are doing that. When we were working with students with ASD, and it will come up when we talk about career planning, we really strongly emphasize that the students make themselves available to the career service, to career services, because they offer such a wide range of support for students to prepare for employment. And we had students that would say to us, I don't need the career service because I know exactly what I want to do when I exit college. But we want to make sure that students, as they transition, are very much aware of those services on campus. And colleges and universities will advertise them or provide information, but it is something that the students need to sort of put on their radar so that they understand that there are these services on campus. Then there are also orientation sessions designed. A number of colleges and universities have bridge programs, which are summer programs to help students adjust to the college environment prior to a fall semester, and looking at what kinds of ways that students are able to what types of orientation and what types of perhaps bridge programs are available. So I do want to talk about receiving services through the Office of Disability Support Services. So under IDEA, students are entitled, once they go through the testing and that is needed and identified as a student with a disability, they are entitled to receive services. And those services really are those accommodations or adjustments, or their IEP is all sort of built around to ensure that they are able to obtain the knowledge and skills that are needed. In higher ed, it becomes an eligibility system, meaning that the student needs to go to identify, email, call, go to the Disability Support Service Office to self-identify and register that they have a disability and they are seeking accommodations. Higher education system is under the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and the K through 12 is through the IDEA. So under the higher ed system, services or supports, accommodations, are to ensure that there's equal access to all information and to services on the college campus. So just an overview of the process again, and I know that I have said this previously, but it is absolutely such a critical step, that the student must identify to this office and provide documentation. And prior to, as you look at, what's the right match in terms of colleges or universities, really find out what the documentation process is and what types of information or that is this office would be asking for in order to determine the accommodations and supports that a student. Not all the supports would necessarily, what a student received in high school would necessarily move automatically to college, because again, in high school or all the way through the K-12 system, it is to enable students to ensure that they are learning the skills and progressing, if you will, meeting their IEP goals. In college, again, it is an access, so they have all the information and access to information resources on campus. They are responsible for discussing their accommodation letter with faculty. Again, they do not have to say what their disability is unless they so choose, but they do need to talk with the faculty about their accommodations. And one thing that we've really had to work with students, all students with disabilities, but today students also with ASD, is that students sometimes will get their accommodation letter but decide not to use it right away. They want to see how the class is, do they really need it? And perhaps for some classes that might be the case, but it's just always a good idea to go in and provide the letter so that the accommodations are in place if and when the student wants to have that happen. Now, when I say if and when, they can talk about the letter, but they need to make sure that at some point they are using these accommodations, because these services are not retroactive. Meaning, if a student decides, I'm going to see how the class goes, I'm going to see what's happening, and then maybe I'll see if they provide the letter. Let's say they have a midterm, they do not do well on the midterm and they think, I need to have my accommodations, and they go to the faculty member at that point, it does not cover the first part of that course. Your accommodations for the student starts the moment the student says, I am requesting accommodations in this particular course. So a colleague and I did a study with students with ASD, and I also worked with another colleague at another university on that transition, developing a college transition and support program. So what are college students with ASD saying about the assistance they need? In the academic setting, they're saying they need work on problem solving, how to address some of the problems that they are facing in the course, setting goals, stress management, time management, and that whole process of talking with faculty. Career preparation, they would like informational interviews, maybe having job shadow or mentor. Again, very important, a disclosure plan for employers, and part of that process to really work on something like that is when they go through this whole disclosure process in college. Help and assistance with interview skills or internships. And many of these, especially informational interviews, job shadow, many of these that they have identified are available through career centers or are available at, many times through the major that a student is going through, because again, there has been more done now in college to really look at preparing these students and getting a better understanding of what the employment environment will be post college. Campus life, independent living skills, the social demands while focusing on school, on their academics. So I know that maybe for many of you, these are areas that you are working on or are very familiar with, but they still do continually come up, and there's still work that needs to be done as students now in college are saying, these are sort of the preparation or the skill developments that I needed prior to coming in, or I still need while in college. I'm going to talk for a minute about predictors. Why do we need to talk about predictors, and what does this mean? So there are, in the left-hand column, predictors are outcomes, some of the areas, and you can see X's in the boxes. Now, it doesn't mean that there isn't effective practices in all these areas, but this table really looks at what are evidence-based, what are research-based practices that are part and important for students by outcome area. Why we really need to be working on this is in a national follow-up study. It's called NLTS 2012. They follow nationally students with disabilities. It is what they call the third wave of doing this. So it's been going on for 20 some years or better now, and this is the third wave of data they're collecting nationally on students with disabilities in high school and their transition. What we're finding in this national study, this recent one, but they have seen over time as well, that autism is one of 5 disability groups that are at risk of not transitioning successfully beyond high school. So that is very much a deep concern, that students with ASD would be one of 5 of these disability groups. We also know that students with autism are less likely to perform daily activities of living. They found that these students are less likely to take college entrance exams, and they are less likely to have paid work experience while in high school. And they're less likely that families expect students to live independently post-high school. Now, one of the key predictors, absolutely the key predictors you can see on this chart, is paid employment work experience prior to exit while in high school it's come up again and again. You can see inclusion in general ed classes. There are a number of predictors that are on this particular slide. As you can see, again, we're getting more and more knowledge about employment. We're, in terms of evidence-based, we're growing in terms of the area of education. I would hope we use this in our work to really design the support services or studies around what we are working on, because we know that we can identify some of these predictors that would be so essential for successful transition post high school. So I would hope that after the presentation or at some point in time, those of you who are interested would really look at this as something to really consider in terms of whether you're building support services or working with someone. Again, the X's are looking at where there's research-based, evidence-based practices in these areas. There are effective practices, so a number of other of these boxes would be filled, but we really are trying to get to the level where we're looking at evidence-based practices and building what we need for students to be successful. So today I'm going to just sort of briefly go through some of the key components of this post-school transition. Again, you can, as you looked at the predictor outcome chart, there are several key areas, but I want to talk about some of the key areas that I have seen and feel are so important, not only for the transition to college, but to persist and stay in college and graduate and move on to that next important step. So I'm going to touch on career awareness, that paid employment work experience, so critical, the self-management and self-determination. If you think back to what college students with ASD have been saying they need, this is very much evidenced in what we need to be looking at as key predictors to help prepare students. So in career awareness, this is where we really look for home, community, and school to really collaborate together to offer that. The earlier it starts, the better. I know that students with ASD, one of their strengths is being very focused on areas of interest and being able to be very highly successful in those areas of interest. But we want to make sure that we are providing those opportunities and options to really explore and to really find out almost sort of what the expectations are. Informational interviews and volunteering is really a good way to get into situations, employment or other environments, to really get an idea of what some of those expectations are. And also to look at what are those opportunities. You know, we really worked with students. We did a study on careers for students with ASD to really talk about how they looked at this career, what they saw themselves doing. And I know it's very hard sometimes for students with ASD to visualize sort of what that might look like in that next environment. And that's why getting exposure to those environments is so critical. We had one student that went through undergraduate, and we worked with him when he was a graduate student. We said, what are you seeing that you may be doing, or what is of interest to you in terms of what you're getting your master's in and how you may apply that knowledge, or where are you going with this? And he said, I have no idea. I have no idea what jobs. I don't know what it looks like at all. And so we felt that it was so important for him to really get further exposure to really understand sort of what the environment is, what those environments are, I should say, and what some of those expectations are within those environments, and what needs to happen in college then to ensure that that's happening. And there are many things that can be done in the home to increase independence, out in the community to explore. We worked with a young man with ASD in high school. We have a particular project where we work with students, and they get a paid internship prior to exiting high school. And as part of that, he had to learn the transportation in his community so that he could get from school to this internship and then back home. And the family member, in terms of their response, said not only was the experience great for him in terms of learning about expectations at work and everything, but he learned the community and lived there his whole life. And now it opened a whole new world for him in terms of other opportunities out in the community. I can't emphasize enough paid employment. Paid employment is really the gold standard, if you will. Work experience of some kind, work-based learning that a lot of high schools are doing now is absolutely important. But in terms of some of the typical experiences that students have when they go through high school, many of them work. And that whole thing of what the expectations of employers, what environments, communicating with coworkers, all of this builds for increasing independent living skills, also for what future careers might look like, but also this whole communication and understanding what expectations are can assist as students move into the higher ed community. So this is so important, and they can be, they don't necessarily have to be in the student's future career. We all have particular jobs. I talk to families and educators a lot. The problem with some of the employment that we do now is like, get them that job and they keep that job. No, we need to build careers. That's the whole thing we need to be doing. And so sometimes you start out in a job that isn't what your ultimate career goal is, but it teaches you a lot about the work environment and that whole expectation. Self-management is so critical. The whole organizational skills, study skills. There are many different types of templates. I'm just going to show a few today, but it's almost like the student needs to find how best through technology, through whatever is the means that they are most comfortable in using to really get a sense of organization. And a lot of that organization needs to be passed to them as much as possible early on, so that they can take on how to organize their classes at that point, the workload. And there may be some, because of the skill sets that they have, are very highly organized, very highly able to do that, but those type of skills need to transfer into an environment where it's far less structured, as we talked about, many competing demands on their social time, or on their time for studying, or what they may be involved in. So it's really important to have some of those core skills. And goal setting, problem solving also. There are various templates about that. We worked with a group of students on goal setting, problem solving, and these were college students, freshmen and sophomore and transfer students. And for them, this was so essential and critical for them, because they were able to break down some of the steps of assignments they had, and set time frames, and really set a goal as to what and once they stuck to that, they found that they were able to really manage what they were confronted with to do. I'm not sure if you all have been on the I'm Determined website. This is an excellent website for families, students, educators, and this is what's called a good day plan. And we have used this and have been able to work with students on this. We were working with a student with ASD who was transitioning to a 2-year college, And we started with what happens on a good day. What are those things? What are those elements that are happening on a good day? Does it happen now? And what needs to happen for a good day? Well, out of this discussion, we found out that a good day for him is if there's not a fire drill that happens. That when he had fire drills in high school, he would literally run out of the building. So we found out through what makes a good day, we found out that that would make it a good day if he could get through a fire drill. So we found out the procedure for the fire drill on the campus, and students do receive an email. So we alerted him to that. We went around and looked at where all the alarms would go off. Now this was a smaller 2-year college, so we were able to do that. Where he took most, if not all, of his classes. And so we were able to sort of identify that, and then we strategized about what he needed to do in order to stay in, to exit with everyone, but not necessarily run and take off. So he was so proud of himself the next time that we met. We asked how he was doing, and he said, I made it through my first fire drill. Another is goal planning. Now there are a number of steps or templates that we can use for goal planning. And again, it is really important to look at what the goal, obviously the goal, look at the templates that might be the most helpful for goal planning. There are things like the SMART goals, which is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. This is a template. This is another template example that I have on the screen. Really identifying, making sure that the goal is what the goal is, what is measurable, what are the steps to that, and what are the anticipated outcomes, and who can support the individual to reach the goal. It really helps give a visual. It does not have to be, it can be a goal in any area of the student's life, and it would be what that individual would really like to work on at that point. Goal planning, in many respects, is problem solving. So we have a goal. How do we reach that? What do we need to anticipate? How can we best plan? How can we plan for some unexpected types of events? We had to do that with the same student that I just talked about. His first day of class, he got a note. There was a note on the door that his instructor there had to be a change in the instructor. The class was not going to be held that day, and we really had to work through how do we work through some of these unexpected events that come up during a typical day. So self-determination, again, the cornerstone of that is the self-advocacy and understanding the disability and how it impacts learning, those whole goal setting. This is all around self-determination. How can I work toward my goals, what I need to be doing, breaking long-term goals down into manageable steps, and how to be flexible, which is something that we've had to work with our students, especially with ASD, how to be flexible to adjust when needed, so that they can manage those academics and accommodations. I do want to talk a bit about the one-pager. This is a really great template to identify strengths and needs. For instance, under my strengths, looking at what do I do well in school? What can I do well in the home and community? And what do other people say that I'm good at? What are other people saying that are my strengths? And my interests, especially with students with ASD, looking at what do I like to do when I'm not in school. We see in these national studies that that students with ASD are not necessarily meeting up with their peers during the week, or are in various social activities oftentimes. What organizations are out there that I would enjoy participating in, and what are sort of some of my hobbies? I know that interests can be very strongly driven, and that is something that we've had to work with students who go into employment about. We've worked with students to say, in the morning when you see your coworkers, yes, you can talk a little bit about whatever their area of high interest is, but we need to make, we worked on setting what those limits, maybe setting his or her watch before going in, so that when it beeped, he or she knew they had to get to work, and sort of what needs to happen in terms of those areas. Then we look at preferences. What kinds of things work for me in terms of being successful, and what are those things that help me, and where do I see myself, or what do I think about when I'm thinking about living on my own or living in a community, working, and what are some things that are difficult for me in terms of some of my needs that would prevent me from meeting some of my my preferences or my goals, and what accommodations would help me with my needs, and who else can help me. So they really start looking at ways that they can take on those areas and really sort of drive for themselves what's important to them, how to seek the information or resources they need, and how that fits within what they would ultimately like to do. I just want to go over a few resources. Again, the Center on Transition.org, Center on Transition Innovations, has a wealth of information in terms of the whole transition process in multiple areas. I would like to highlight that a course, it is a self-paced course for students who are interested in going to college. It's called Get Ready for College. It's self-paced. Students can do it on their own. They can do it within an educational setting. They can do it at home. It is very much geared to students, and based on the work that we have done for a number of years to really highlight those areas and get students really thinking about college and all the aspects of college, and to be prepared for that. Again, it's self-paced. It's free, and can be, we've had family members take it, and to learn more about sort of those various components in college. The National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, NTACT, is another organization. They do a lot of work with the predictors, but there's also a number of resources available that might be very helpful in terms of the transition to college, and so I have listed that. I'm Determined is just a wonderful website for educators. It aligns with all the standards of learning, and goes from, I think some of them are even preschool level now, all the way up through, and there are a number of ways that students can become involved in the I'm Determined project itself. I would be remiss if I didn't also list the Autism Center for Excellence, which is also at VCU ACE. ACE is our sister organization to the Center on Transition Innovations. And ACE also has a wealth of resources and social skills and all the areas that are so important for students to be successful. So ACE is another, also another wonderful resource to explore if you haven't already. I've gone through a great deal of information. I probably have not smiled enough. I really get focused on what I'm saying, but I really am very passionate about this and hope that the information, it's a lot of ground to cover. I was hoping to hit the high points, if you will, in terms of some things to really be thinking about in this transition. And I do appreciate your time and attention, and I believe I pass it back to Sarah for any questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Liz. That was absolutely fantastic. All right, everyone, we're going to open the chat up for questions. If you'd like to go ahead and add whatever you'd like for me to share there in that Zoom group chat, that would be great. Now go ahead and start taking your questions one by one and reading them out to Liz and everyone else. So we'll give you about 2 to 3 minutes to go ahead and ask any questions needed. I do want to let everyone know that we are going to be sending out certificates and the presentation after the webinar is finished. So you will get all that information. All right, we have a question here. Thank you for the resources page. I don't know if this is a question so much, but we have our 18-year-old son who started online courses yesterday with local community college. Just recognizing that organization is going to be a huge hurdle for him and us. That's awesome.
That's great.
Thanks. Stephanie from DBHDS is saying thank you. I share the same feelings, the same sentiments. Thank you, Liz. This has been amazing. For the program at CA, we can utilize this information. It's really, really amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do. When asked to do presentations like this, it's I spend a lot of time trying to hopefully provide, again, sort of those touch points that we really need to be thinking about. The transition is big, there's no doubt about it, and there are many moving parts to it, but hopefully if we can look at what those guideposts are, it can help. And the student also very intricately, and it's a very integral part of this process. It's an exciting process. I don't want to take that away either. It's a very exciting as the individual moves to the next step in their adulthood. But it is a lot of information. So I'm glad you're getting the PowerPoint, and certainly feel free to email me if you have any questions that come up after you've thought about it and reviewed the information.
Awesome. Thank you. We do have a question from Barbara. She says, is VCU considering beginning an autism support program for students with ASD seeking a 4-year degree, much like Massey and GMU?
I know that there has been talk of doing that over the years. I'm not aware of where those discussions are, to be honest. So at this point, I'm afraid I really can't give you an answer on that, because I mean, I've been involved in various discussions from time to time, but I'm not really sure where things are at this point.
Thank you. We have another question. Thank you for all the useful information. What happens when the schools don't help promote student responsibility and advocacy? The school system I work with enables a lot of bad habits and reliance. I work for a nonprofit and am normally school-based. How can we intervene as a CBO?
Okay, could you repeat that again?
Sure, yeah.
Thank you.
What happens, I guess, first part, what happens when the schools don't help promote student responsibility and advocacy? So the school system Gabriella works for enables a lot of bad habits and reliance, as in the students' reliance. I work for a nonprofit and I am normally school-based. How can we intervene as a community-based organization?
Yeah, that is a tough situation, and the best that the best that I can that I would say is we need to make sure that that educators are aware of various resources and making sure that families and students are aware of various resources. I know that when we go into a school division, when I was at the Center on Transition and Innovations, I mean, we did go into school divisions and across the state. It really varies in terms of what kinds of transition services or what the emphasis is. I would say too, to look to see who is, because the Autism Center for Excellence has individuals, a staff that are located in various parts of the state to work with particular, in particular school divisions. And they really may be a helpful partner in that. I also think if you haven't talked with the Family Center, Dana Yarborough at the Partnership for People with Disabilities, there are family advocates that are located across the state. What you want to build a positive, if you will, coalition or collaboration, and really work to have the school be a partner of that. And the more that you have allies that can, that know of individuals, you have to find your ally within the school who really wants to make these changes. Now, the State Department of Ed, I mean, there are many initiatives that are coming out now to really build on what we have been talking about today. I would have students get involved in the I'm Determined project. They have an I'm Determined Summit where you apply, and that's just been life-changing for so many students. And there are various avenues to sort of build those strengths, make people aware, and really try to build that kind of collaboration. And I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much, Liz. Are there any other questions? Gabriella says, yes, it is. Thank you. Well, I just, if there aren't any more questions, I just want to say again to Liz Getzel, thank you so much. We really appreciated all the information and having you here at the CA Human Services webinar. Just a reminder to everyone within the chat to say goodbye so that you can get your certificate of attendance. And again, we'll be following up with information with the presentation and your certificates following the webinar.
Well, thank you again for this opportunity. I really enjoyed it, and thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you all for coming, and I hope everyone has a great day.